Good morning and happy Sabbath to you all. It is wonderful to be here in the Sabbath school hour, my favorite part of church. I think this is where one's voice is heard and where church becomes your own. And so we're delighted to continue the conversation that has started this week about the environment, but very specifically that elephant in the room of our lives for the last 2 years, COVID-19. I was telling Mark I am neglectful. For Halloween this year, my husband made me a COVID head, and I went as COVID-19 for Halloween, and he went as Dr. Fauci. We had lots of fun.
I wonder if we could get the picture on
the picture would, oh well, anyway, you can just imagine a basketball with red things coming out of my head. That's what it looked like. I am delighted to have 3 wonderful colleagues here with me this morning to carry on this discussion, but I had thought of 2 things that to me tell me about the yin and yang around COVID within Adventism. I was delighted as an Adventist a couple of weeks ago watching the evening news in my hometown of Sacramento to hear that Advent Health was having a vaccination clinic at the Sikh festival that takes place annually just north of us in Yuba City. And that is a huge event. They have like 100,000 people that go through Yuba City for free food, because they give out free food for like 3 days. And Advent Health was running a vaccination clinic all 3 days, and it was being announced that way on the evening news, and it just made me really proud of Advent Health, that they were partnering with the Sikh community in that way, and that we were offering a really wonderful service to the community. And on the other hand, I was recently someone shared with me a video coming out of one of the churches in the Central California Conference, in which the pastor spent an hour and a half showing how the problem with the vaccine was that it was going to alter your DNA so that you no longer believed in God. It was going after the God gene, and that was going to be altered if you got the vaccine. And it's had thousands of views on YouTube. And it starts with the pastor talking about the significance of healthcare within Adventism, how many hospitals we have, that we have more doctors than any other religion. Then there were pictures of Loma Linda. And then we go into conspiracy theory in my mind. And I think that is where we find ourselves as a church. We're talking to the public in 2 very, very different ways. And that has some real challenges. To start our discussion, I'm delighted to have Bill Cork with us. Bill is the Assistant Director of Adventist Chaplaincy for the North American Division. He's also currently enrolled in a Master's of Public Health program at the University of Texas. And so, Bill, without further ado, what do you think?
What do I think? So do you want me to read the statement you asked, or my initial remarks?
Whatever you like.
Okay, well, first, I do not appear as a representative of the North American Division, and I do not speak as a spokesperson for the North American Division. But Bonnie asked me to read the NAD official statement. And if you go to the NAD webpage under the official resources on vaccines, you get this statement dated March 30th. Voted recommendations to NAD administration regarding requests for religious exemptions to vaccine requirements. The NAD is committed to sharing hope and wholeness through the healing ministry of Christ by promoting the Church's historic health message. This includes caring for our own bodies as the temple of the Holy Spirit and ministering to the health of others within our community. In line with this commitment, the NAD fully supports the Seventh-day Adventist Church's statement encouraging responsible immunization vaccination, and as such has no religious or faith-based reason not to encourage its adherents to responsibly participate in protective and preventive immunization programs. While the Church's statement recognizes it is, quote, not the conscience of the individual church member and recognizes individual choices, unquote, the choice not to be vaccinated is not based on Seventh-day Adventist Church teachings or doctrine. For this reason, the Adventist Church in North America does not provide church-endorsed vaccine exemption request letters. The Seventh-day Adventist Church respects convictions of conscience. While the NAD cannot endorse that vaccine refusal represents Adventist teachings, your local union, public affairs, and religious liberty ministry is available to advise you in writing your own letter if you choose to pursue an individual vaccine exemption, unquote. So she wanted me to read that just as kind of a baseline of official position. Sigvi asked me to talk in the invitation to talk about a community perspective, though. And though I work for the NAD and travel promoting chaplaincy and caring for our 730 Seventh-day Adventist chaplains in North America, I kind of cover the area between the Mississippi and the Rockies, but I remain deeply rooted in my own community, a little town about 3 hours to the east of here called Houston, Texas. We moved to Houston in '98. And my kids attended schools in the diverse A-Leaf neighborhood from first grade through high school. I've been involved in the community as a chaplain, pastor, a teacher of world religions, and as a participant in interfaith organizations. My professional focus has been for the last 10 years in suicide prevention, growing out of my work as a chaplain in the National Guard and the Army Reserve. And in that role, I serve on the advisory board of the Texas Suicide Prevention Council. And 4 years ago, because of my involvement in the interfaith community, I was asked to be a faith-based representative when Harris County Public Health was doing its every 5-year strategic planning process. And those were some of the things that led me to start this work on this Master of Public Health degree in health promotion at the beginning of the pandemic. And my public health studies have given me a theoretical foundation for what I really grasped instinctively, that there's so many issues in our society that we will only be able to solve through community-based multi-sector partnerships addressing what we call the social determinants of health. And faith-based organizations, including churches, have to be part of that mix. And I think we do that well in Houston. And I'm proud of the way that the city has come together to confront the many challenges of the past 2 years. On June 2nd of last year, for instance, 60,000 of us marched in remembrance of George Floyd, whose roots were in our community, and we marched with his family. A week later, while George Floyd's funeral was taking place in another part of Houston, 1,000 of us, students, faculty, and healthcare professionals in the Texas Medical Center, marched as white coats for Black lives. Now, some of y'all who don't live in Houston, Texas, associate our state with our governor and our senators. But my community, I remind you, has a Seventh-day Adventist Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee, who is of a different opinion on many subjects from them. The Texas Medical Center is the world's largest, is also home to stellar scientists like Dr. Peter Hotez, author of 2 highly relevant books I'd encourage you to read, Vaccines Didn't Cause Rachel's Autism and Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in a Time of Anti-Science. So unlike the science denial that we see at the Texas Capitol in Houston, faith leaders, healthcare professionals, researchers, city and county officials have come together for common purpose throughout the pandemic. We've had weekly Zoom conferences to disperse information. They've seen that the faith-based community is a critical partner in getting out information, especially in our very diverse community, as well as collaborating to sponsor clinics to make testing and vaccines readily available. And one of the star players in that in Houston has been an Adventist church, World Harvest Outreach of the Southwest Region Conference, distributing food and water after our deep freeze last winter and hosting vaccine and testing clinics. I wish more of our churches did so. My first public health class last summer happened to be on equity and disparity issues in the COVID pandemic. And it gave me tools to better understand how the history of our once segregated southern city impacts the health of its citizens today. And I believe that the church, especially this church whose racial diversity we celebrate, has to be outspoken on addressing the systemic nature of racism. That we need to critically examine the role race has played in our communities and in our churches. We need to reclaim our radical roots, and just as radical in this new dark age, reaffirm a commitment to promoting evidence-based public health interventions. And we need a broader sense of community. Beyond the city and state, beyond nationalism, we need a sense of planetary community. And we have that identity as ourselves. We say we're a remnant drawn from all nations, kindred, tongues, and people. We proclaim a call to worship the one who made heaven and earth and sea and the fountains of waters. We should be active participants in promotion of One Health and planetary health. And I want to especially thank Greg and Sigvi for their papers yesterday. Good teachers taught me long ago that passionate care for community is where the rubber hits the road in ministry. 40 years ago, Charles Teal introduced me to the 19th century Boston Unitarian transcendentalist and abolitionist Theodore Parker. Charles and Parker and other prophetic pastors like Oscar Romero and Martin Luther King taught me that to be a pastor is not to be an entrepreneur or a salesman, but to be a shepherd who spends time with their sheep, and to be so close to them that, as Pope Francis said, you smell like your sheep. It is to follow Christ into the community, to love the community, and to work for its justice, health, and peace.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was very beautiful. We will now turn to Mark Carr, and Mark has spent 10 years on the Loma Linda University Bioethics Committee. He's now the Alaska Regional Director of Ethics for the Providence Healthcare System in Anchorage.
Thanks, Bonnie. I want to give a shout out to North American Division Chaplaincy Ministries. When I moved back to Anchorage, Alaska, my local church and conference didn't feel I should be issued credentials through the conference. People directed me to ACM, and I now hold, thank you very much, I think the only certificate that says chaplain/bioethicist.
Yeah, he's unique.
So I appreciate it immensely. I want to start with public health. It's different. If you don't understand public health, you cannot understand what the country and the world is going through. It is corporate or whole or population-based, whatever language you want to use. It is not individualism. It is not individual physician-patient relationships at the core of public health. You cannot start with the individual in a public health crisis situation. You cannot. It doesn't work. You have to start from the public. This is necessarily difficult for Seventh-day Adventists. The ethic that underlies and undergirds public health is utilitarianism. By definition, the greatest good for the greatest number, it marginalizes people. That's what it does. And it has served as the foundation for a public health ethic for decades, more than that. Social utility, not moral value, is attached to the individual in a time of mass casualty or pandemic sort of crisis, okay? And if that person, when you get to the individual level of getting a vaccine, for instance, if that person has social utility, say they're a nurse, someone who can care for sick people, then they get to the front of the line. Not because they've earned it, not because they're morally more valuable than anybody else in the room, but because they have utility for the society to keep functioning. If you don't understand that perspective, you won't understand the situation that we're in presently. I can't drive that home any more strongly. COVID has demonstrated to us that health and healthcare in America has become politicized, and that's not necessarily bad. I frankly think everything is political. That's not necessarily a problem. We're political creatures. But it has also demonstrated that American healthcare is failing the American public, particularly people of color in the American public. And what I wonder is how we will attend to that reality. This is not new, folks. Teaching ethics and public health at Loma Linda almost 20 years ago, the data was already clear that people of color were not getting the same kind of health care that others were. And it has become worse and worse all through those years until now, and it's been highlighted in dramatic ways presently. Area deprivation index, social vulnerability index, these things show us how your neighborhood is served by the American healthcare system. Go and look it up, the Area Deprivation Index, and you can pull up your own neighborhood and show yourself how your neighborhood is doing in relationship to the neighborhood across the railroad tracks. Adventism's embrace of the public health perspective, some evidence. Over 50 years ago, we started the School of Public Health at Loma Linda. It was the 12th accredited School of Public Health in the country. Now there are over 100 schools of public health, not programs, schools. We've graduated over 7,600 students from the School of Public Health. Elder Wilson is one of them. The health message and its assertion that there are things that we can do to prevent disease seems kind of natural to embrace the public health perspective from our part. Authentic Adventism, in my view, and certainly in the view of the General Conference's most recent reminder that we are in support of vaccination programs, October 25th statement, they felt the need to again publish the fact that we are in support. I don't see anything within our tradition, not from religious liberty, not from individual conscience, that could serve as a legitimate foil to the public health perspective. I don't see it. I'll say more. Third, the misinformation and propaganda through the American culture wars has and will continue to change our church. One of the things that frames me on this perspective is my view within the sociological development of Adventism. As it developed in Battle Creek and the fires happened, administrative branch of Adventism moved to the East Coast, and the healthcare branch of Adventism moved to the West Coast. Subsequently, as Adventism developed, a third branch has developed, and I call it the business branch. It is part and parcel of American capitalist business. There is no dividing line between the two. You can call it not-for-profit health if you want, but they all go to the same schools of business, the same financial measures and benchmarks are used in every single hospital system. A corporation is a corporation is a corporation. Those three branches of Adventism I see as partially framing for my own understanding and analysis of what's going on. The tension between the administrative branch of Adventism and the healthcare branch is exactly the same tension I see within Catholic healthcare. I work now in Catholic healthcare, have for 7 years in the Providence St. Joseph Health System. 120,000 employees, over 60 hospitals, not-for-profit, faith-based healthcare. It's the exact same problem. Battles tension between serving the public as a branch of ministry of the church, as opposed to the administrative branch that necessarily serves itself. One is altruistic, the other is egoistic. Anyway, I could go quite on and on. Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year 2016, post-truth. But a few months later, the embrace of alternative facts in the American culture wars. Adventism's complicity in the countercultural traditions within America. Again, I don't know that you can draw a very sharp line between the two. Our interpretation of the truth as an alternative, sectarian, contrarian reality that stands not far away from the likes of QAnon. I know my time is short, and I want to say some things that get your attention. I don't see Adventism as being necessarily able to be extracted from the American culture wars that embrace conspiracy theory. How are we going to navigate that? I don't know. The debates, the fights in Adventism today over COVID are not fights about public health. They're not fights about vaccinations. They're fights about personal liberties, conscience, standing up against an oppressive government. It's an extension of the American culture wars. For instance, the idea of a religious exemption for a vaccine. Thank you for reading that statement, Bill. It's not an oddity, I think I've already noted. Within Catholicism, again, in the health system I work in, there are 10 people in the Department of Theology and Ethics in the corporation that I work for. And to a person, when the company mandated vaccines for all of our employees, with a deadline that would face, release, they would be released. To a person, none of our people in that theology and ethics department were willing to be involved in vetting requests for religious exemption, because none of us thought it would be possible within the Catholic view about health and vaccinations. But if you follow Catholic news, they're as equally divided as we are, which points out the fact that I think we're talking about culture wars, not religion. How does that affect, and how do we understand what's going on? I'll end with a couple questions. Do we really think that there will be a winner in the Adventist culture wars? Who will win this debate that we're engaged in? Does Adventism believe in science as a God-gifted tool in concert with natural revelation that can draw us closer to Him and enhance our life? Or has our stubborn insistence and attention to the denigration of evolutionary science and now public health taken us over the edge, away from science altogether? Does Adventism have any real interest in the common good of our societies? And again, I tie this back to that division in Adventism that started in Battle Creek. Are we altruistically devoted to the public in our healthcare ministry? Or are we doing it only so that we can get their ear to convert them to Adventism, which is necessarily an egoistic function? Is Adventism facing the public with an altruistic view to the common good, or are we interested in ourselves and building our numbers? Thanks.
A lot to think about there, Mark. Thank you very much. Our third panelist today is Ann Colliard-Freed, who is an associate professor of religion at Kettering College. Also interested in training of chaplaincy, and it's at that point of the patient meeting death that chaplains have been called on so significantly during this pandemic, and I know it has been very hard on them. So how do you prepare them for this? How do you train them? And tell us about your view on chaplaincy and COVID.
Thank you, Bonnie. I've had the opportunity to work with CPE students from time to time, but mostly I'm doing courses in death and dying and applied spiritual care for undergrad nursing students, senior nursing students who've been in the clinic quite a bit, and also with OT students and PA students in interprofessional courses. And so we've gone through this time of COVID together. I've learned a lot in their experience, and I understood that I was going to be asked in this conversation to tell you about what is the status of clinical ministry in the hospital, by chaplains. And so I have not been in the clinic during COVID, though I have 4 units of CPE, and I spent quite a bit of time on the ICU. And I did 3 years in hospice. And so being in 2 different CPE programs, when I was 22 or 23 at Loma Linda in the neurosurgery unit and in the intensive care at the VA, and then much later in 2014 to 15, finished up in Salt Lake City, and also did quite a bit in the ICU. And so I understand what is regular in the ICU. It's very difficult to see people not coming off vents, dying on vents, but there was not a sense of overwhelm or not being able to retreat and get support. And so I went to ask a friend who is also an adjunct for us at Kettering, and I got to know her because she had a friend who was Presbyterian and who got a grant for women in chaplaincy and ministry in general, and they were from Austin Presbyterian Seminary. And she wrote my friend, Alyssa Full, by the way, I met her here. She was a student, very articulate student. And she put in a great prospectus for the grant, and she gave it a really interesting name. Nevertheless, they persisted. So that was the name of our cohort, and it still is. So we got to have, and this grant was very generous, and it was going to allow us to have 2 retreats, and then we could buy books. And so we had one retreat in St. George, and we had a wonderful time, but by the time the first year was done and the second year got started, we were planning our next retreat, but we couldn't do it. But we kept together through Zoom, as all of us have been doing, and we did have one final where we split 2 in the West Coast and the other 2 in the East Coast because of travel restrictions for some of us. But it was a great way to learn about how those who were still in chaplaincy ministry, so Alyssa has shared with me in a very concise way, and I'm going to share this with you for now. So she outlined 3 phases of chaplaincy ministry during the pandemic. And the first phase was just the challenge to go forward with what we understand as chaplains as the main thing that we do in chaplaincy, especially when you're working with people suffering and anticipating death, potentially. How do we stand with people? How do we stay with him in an incarnational way so that we are following our Lord Jesus, who is God with us? And so that became an immediate challenge. How do we be with our patients? How do we be with our patients in ways that are connecting and allow them to feel accompanied and safe and loved when we can't be present with them? And so through that challenge, creativity was provoked, and Alyssa talked about the ways in which she did this, using her iPad, of course, and using the phone, and also making little prayer cards that are, specific to the patient and their story, and letting it be on their time. We don't just impose ourselves on others, but letting it be on their time. So there was a second phase, as we know, as those adaptations took place. And by the way, that first phase was really driven by the chaos of a lack of PPE, of course, PPE. And so the chaplains didn't feel like they could take that PPE when the clinicians who were treating the patients needed it, when the family members or the other patients needed them. So that drove that. So in the next phase really took a turn when there was plenty PPE, and they began to see what kind of new protocols needed to develop. And what kind of started to drive this when you had more and more deaths, and you had people who had already, and I'm talking about staff, who had been traumatized by the large numbers of deaths that they witnessed and the suffering they witnessed. And so the chaplains had to really turn toward them and to really be with them as much as possible, and to find programs that they could provide for them as well. And then for the family members, they had new rituals. I wish I could remember exactly how they did this ritual, because Alyssa shared this in one of my courses. But she talked about a kind of code where they would call the staff when they brought out a body, or if they had the family leaving, and maybe they didn't do it when the body was taken out. Probably if they did, it was because the family asked. So, but those rituals made a big difference for the staff, but they needed more. So there was a third innovative and creative phase beyond the regular practice of chaplains of supporting their staff, in regular kind of burnout situations, which will happen often, and compassion fatigue. And to that list, they needed to plan for addressing a lot of people who dealt with moral injury and moral distress. And of course that happens on the ICU regularly, but not as consistently. It's overwhelming is what we're talking about. And so it does get overwhelming also for the chaplains, I'm imagining, even though they're trained into how to be resilient and how to take care of themselves. And Alyssa talks about this new third page as being a 5 to 10 year project. So I would invite you to pray for them. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a blessing once they get those things in place. And Alyssa, I'll just brag on her. She's a leader in this area, as well as a scholar, and she loves books. And some of you might have met her last year on one of our pre-sessions on our Zoom conference. So I would just want to say one thing about the ethical dimension here for us as scholars. And I am very adamant that we need to teach our healthcare students, first of all, that way of caring for themselves so they can be resilient as they encounter these things. If we're a practical theologian who can bring that, and that we also help them to understand how to be with people who are grieving and avoiding distancing, but further than that, giving them skills. Would you give anybody a care plan medically without the skills to implement it? No. And if we're going to say we're going to do whole person care, we need to teach them how to be with people in deep grief. And it's so encouraging when you get back on your assignments and you can see that in their field projects, when they get to practice this, that they are able to do that and understand how to be and what to do and how to move toward rather than distancing. So I'll stop there, but I want to bring up that ethical connection.
Thank you, Anne. I particularly am struck by the phrase of how to stand with someone in the presence of death. I think that's enlarged our challenge. How do we stand with our communities through this very, very challenging time? And how do we stand with our family members that don't agree on how to respond to this present moment? Mm-hmm. I saw a really effective short doc on an administrator for a small hospital in Washington who was looking at the mandate from the state that all of his employees had to be vaccinated by a certain date, and it was particularly threatening to their organization because they were in a small community, and if half of their employees decided not to get vaccinated, they weren't going to be able to function as a hospital, and there were not ready resources to refresh that block of personnel. And he took lessons in persuasion, and one of the first things that he learned was you don't tell people that they're wrong. and think that you are going to necessarily bring them over by telling them that they're wrong and they have to do it this way. And so just standing up and confronting people doesn't accomplish, I think, where we want to go. So how do we stand with each other through this divisive moment? And you all are chaplains, and you're very good at standing with people through tough times. And I don't know whether you would like to add any personal comments before we open it up for discussion.
Yeah, the piece that I'd like to add is kind of jumping off of Ann's comments. Because my job with ACM is, in a sense, like a ministerial director of a conference, to be that advocate for and that chaplain to the chaplains in my region. And I have about 100 in the 2 unions that I cover. And the toughest thing for me about the pandemic was for 18 months I couldn't do that in person. For me, getting out there and being with them and seeing their context, being face-to-face is critical. And so we had to look at new ways. How do we care for our own chaplains, whether it's by Zoom, by email, lots of phone calls. But as soon as NAD said, you can travel again, August 1st, first place I went was to New Orleans, where Jackie and Alan Mitchell have been for years, and Alan is at Children's Hospital, and the national news just said that their ICU at Children's Hospital was filled with COVID patients. And now that I'm going out, and the chaplains are telling me their stories, and the hospital administrators, and they're taking me to the ICUs to tell, this is what happened here. And there's that trauma response that's part of it, but also Anne used the term moral injury, which is just coming out into becoming more common. Last time we were here for AAR here in San Antonio, we had a whole day's worth of sessions on moral injury. The term comes from Jonathan Shea, a VA psychiatrist who studied Vietnam veterans and how they just kind of shut down, and some of the incidents of fragging and guilt and so on after the war. He compared to the experience of Achilles in the Iliad, who after Agamemnon yanks his trophy bride away from him, he just goes and sits and fumes and stews and kills prisoners and acts out. And so we see the anger response in the healthcare, the grief, the feelings of guilt of being part of a system that made bad decisions. And that's what we're having to deal with pastorally now. And how can we present both that presence of being there, as well as that message of grace and peace and reconciliation?
Just a note on the symbiotic relationship between ethics and chaplaincy. In the system I work in, I first reported to the Chief Mission Integration Officer for the Alaska region in Providence Health. That was subsequently changed when that Department of Theology and Ethics I referred to earlier was created. But they all report up to the Chief Mission Executive at the corporate board level. The disciplines are distinct, but they're completely interrelated. And this term moral distress or moral injury, when I was in my graduate program at University of Virginia, that was never part of any of my educational training. It has come, it was a long time ago, Carmen. But it has come to be recognized as profoundly important, and by definition it means if there are structures around you that keep you from doing what you know to be the right thing to do, you will suffer moral distress. And if we ignore that, part of what you were noting, Anne, is we have to learn how to appropriately respond to it. For me, it kind of boils down to what are my coping mechanisms? How do I cope with stress and do it healthfully? Adventism has a lot to offer that field.
I would just add that, I talk to a lot of clinicians, especially nursing people in my community, And unfortunately, even though at Kettering we have so many chaplains compared to when I've gone to conferences and people say, wow, we've got one in the whole network. But the nurses, and some of them who've been there a long time, don't refer to chaplains because they're not trained to. And so that's another thing that it's very simple, but we do need to do that training.
We have a few minutes, and so I'd like to open it up now if there are those who would have examples from their local community to share. I always think we learn from the stories of each other, and so if anyone has a story to share, we have one over here. Please tell us your name and where you're from when the mic gets there. While he's preparing the mic, the lesson that I come back to as I listen to all of this is one that I found actually in a novel by Geraldine Brooks. But the mic's there, and I'll tell you that as we conclude. So please.
My name is Stan Tobias, and I'm from Advent Health University in Orlando, Florida.
Thank you.
And one of the things that we found with our chaplains is they really had to focus on caring for our staff. In that second wave that hit Florida in July and August, there was a lot of anger with our physicians and our nurses because 94% that ended up in the hospital, many of those dying, were unvaccinated. And so the feeling was this was preventable. And I think there was even greater anger because we lost 30 staff members in our main campus to COVID. Many of them fully vaccinated. They were just overwhelmed by the virus. And so when you talk about, a moral injury, compassion fatigue, you add into that the anger at the patients because they felt that this was preventable, but also with our nursing staff. We had traveler nurses who were getting paid as much as our family doctors. But the challenge was we had nurses who had been with the company 10, 15, 20 years, and their pay rate didn't change. And so they're saying to the company, why are you paying these new nurses so much more when I've been a loyal nurse all these years? Where's the equity? And so there was the anger, there was the justice issue, a lot of things that we had to deal with. So it was very interesting. Our chaplains had to primarily focus on the staff because if they couldn't function, how could we serve?
Thank you. That's very challenging. Are there others? Oh, Ernie, thank you.
I want to follow up on my boss's comment. Stan's. We both had a conversation with one of our students in the chaplaincy training program that we have, in the degree program.
Hold it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. She described to me on Wednesday night of this week why she was having to take some changes in her curriculum, dropping a course, and actually we had encouraged her to go into some professional counseling so that she could survive. I'm wondering if you could say anything about those kinds of services being provided for our chaplains.
A lot of that's provided at the institution level. One thing that has happened, something that's grown in the last few years, is a Transforming Chaplaincy initiative. It grew out of George Fichette at Rush University and Wendy Cadge at Brandeis into how can they both strengthen the clinical competency of chaplains, making them research literate, making them capable of doing research. They funded a lot of MPHs, but they really grew and blossomed through providing forums for care of chaplains, making groups available for listening sessions across the denominational interfaith spectrums, and really saying this is where we need to focus. How can we help these chaplains who are doing so much? And that's where we've done some things too, but I think the EAPs and so on in different healthcare systems have also been overwhelmed by it and not able to cope, and it's going to be an ongoing issue. I've seen in different institutions the realization of what students are under. I was doing biostats and was ready just to throw the whole thing away, and the teacher said, "Hey, do it incomplete, it's no big deal." And then when other fellow students came to me and said, "Oh, I'm scared to ask," and I said, "No, go ahead. The system understands that we're all under stress." And that message has gotten out, I know, at the University of Texas Health Science Center, to everybody that, this is a time where we are going to be understanding of each other.
Let me just add, I want to also highlight some of the distinctions and differences between not-for-profit healthcare and for-profit healthcare. Earlier I characterized them as being roughly the same. They're not. In many ways they're not. And one of the ways is the institutions, like you noted, from a faith-based perspective, with the money that healthcare brings in, and let's be clear, it brings in a lot of money. Not-for-profit places, faith-based places will reinvest that money into caregivers in ways that another HCA sort of company might not do, Healthcare for America or something like that. So in Providence Health System, yes, there's been a massive reinvestment in trying to care for our caregivers. And it included, Stan, for instance, a one-time financial bonus for those who stayed. But the same problem was voiced on a daily time. I go to the ICU regularly, and the same problem was voiced.
The culture wars you referred to trouble me because I well remember when we elected John F. Kennedy as president, and he appointed a representative to the Vatican, and I heard about it in a sermon at Sligo Church, because it was considered a sign of the corruption of what's happening in government. Since then, of course, we've had, one more Catholic president, I guess? But the evangelical community has moved into the political sphere in a way that's unprecedented in American life, as far as I can tell. And I go to churches and I hear different churches preach different messages about vaccines. And they're evangelical churches, but some are on one side or the other. But the question I ask is this: how has the Adventist church's message, I should say, well, I'm not sure that's the right word I want, contributed to this anti-government sentiment in the Adventist community, which reinforces a negative reaction to any government command, any government mandate? It seems to me that we've done that because our members in many portions of this country are more evangelical than they are Adventist. And I don't know what the way might be to address that, but it's troubling to me, and I think it's a long-term problem we have no real solution for.
Being an Alaskan, which is a place that has a few independent-minded people, the very first time I voted, for instance, at the age of 18, there was a ballot measure on whether or not we should secede from the United States. I voted in favor. The culture wars has walked right through the front door of our sanctuaries, and in many cases through the side doors to the platform from the pastor's office and right into the pulpit. I understand it. It's very effective in terms of getting new people in who are disaffected and who need a community. My fear is what we will do once we get them embraced by our community. How will we help them strike a balance of understanding our historic message about the distinction of a Christ-centered community as opposed to a secular, government-centered community? I don't know how to portray the other side, but How do we maintain a balance for people who are inclined to the extremes? And the culture wars has no space for a centrist position. No space whatsoever.
Living in Texas, we're kind of at the center of all of that. My whole region that goes up to North Dakota, and seeing where the default lines are in Adventism, some are where historically they've been. We've had, you go to the 19th century, and the division between the evangelists versus the healthcare system then has not really gone away in some ways. But then also we have racial differences too. The churches that have resisted masks and vaccines tend to be those of state conferences. The regional conferences, aware of health disparities, have done a much more effective job of doing health promotion, hosting vaccine clinics. I was in Central States area, preached in one church of the Central States Conference. Every person was temperature checked, there was distancing, there was masks, there was education, there were vaccine clinics in the neighborhood. And I was in a church at the other conference that afternoon that was nearly filled, and one retired chaplain and I and his wife were the only ones wearing masks. And I see that distinction. And I think that's going to have some long-term issues for us, both of those fault lines.
Is there a voice of cheer out there anywhere?
I can say something
can do a
that,
cheer.
no, really, at the beginning of the pandemic in particular, in Alaska, I was profoundly impressed at the way healthcare systems cooperated with each other. American corporations don't cooperate, they compete. And I started a conversation with multiple people across multiple corporations in healthcare in Alaska, and the risk management people in the facility were just beside themselves. Wait a minute, hold on, Mark, what are you talking about? Sharing patient information and sharing triage plans and committee members. No, you can't do that. It's a pandemic, people. It changes things. Didn't Ellen White herself? I'm not inclined always to quote Ellen White, but I feel encouraged. Thank you. Circumstances change things, right? It changes our orientation to things. And sometimes I don't think we listen to her much along those lines.
The story that I wanted to share with you from Geraldine Brooks' novel called The Secret Chord, which is a novelized version of King David's story. And it's told through the point of view of the prophet Nathan. And Nathan is in David's court and has been with David as he becomes king, as he becomes lord of this huge territory. And then as he becomes an adulterer and takes Bathsheba and has Bathsheba's husband killed, and he knows that it's going to be his job to stand up to David and to take the word of God to David about the state of what is taking place. And the way that Brooks describes Nathan's angst over this assignment, he goes out and is just totally distraught and is trying to talk with God about what he is to do. And he finally walks away from his time with God with the understanding that his job will be not only to stand up to David and to confront him about what has taken place, but to stand by David as David reaps the consequences of what has taken place. And I think as a community, we are called to this moment to stand up in our communities and to stand by them in the process of what is taking place. It's more than a telling assignment, it's a standing by and loving assignment. And that's what we are tasked as Christians. And I think with that, we'll call our session to a close. If you'd bow your heads with me. Creator God, we thank you for your love. It warms us, it binds us together, it sends us out into the world. Help us to be your ambassadors of love at this time and at all times. In Christ's name, amen.
The theme for this year's convention has been World Disrupted, World Revealed. And we have had some revelations. Revelation of the world of viruses. A revelation of the short distance between Wuhan and Washington, the globalized world that we live in. We have had revelations at the bedside. It's different to be a physician for a dying COVID patient than anyone has ever seen in my generation of doctors. And societal revelations, community revelations. There have been many revelations this year, and we want to thank the panelists for bringing some of that to our attention, to Bill, to Anne, and to Mark, you disappeared there, and to Bonnie for leading our panel. World disrupted, world revealed. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Before we take our break for the intermission and begin our divine worship hour, we want to take a moment to have an acknowledgement of somebody very special to ASRS. And we want to extend a word of appreciation and admiration to Bonnie Dwyer, editor of Spectrum, for a cumulative career of excellence in her contributions to the church. And I've asked Carmen Lau to say a word and then introduce two people that will give tributes in honor of Bonnie.
I'm Carmen Lau. I chair Adventist Forum Board, publisher of Spectrum magazine. I come from Alabama. I'm not an academic, and I thank you for welcoming me. I've been to your group a couple times. It's wonderful. Bonnie has, as circumstances have changed, as Mark referred to, she has stood up and stood by so many of us, as she said earlier, and we thank her for that. As board chair, I can just say she has made the transition as we look to Alexander leading us in the future. She has done it with such grace and class and left us with a wonderful legacy. And I am grateful for her work. And as someone from the diaspora, I'll say that Spectrum and Adventist Forum is a real lifeline to people who want to grapple with ideas. And so I will be forever indebted to her personally for that. And I just want to honor her in every way possible in this moment. And so I'm going to turn the time over to John Brunt, who has known her a long time and has some words to say.
Ephesians 4 admonishes Christians not to be taken in by cunning and crafty deceits, perhaps today read conspiracy theories, but rather to speak the truth in love. I know of no one who has embodied speaking the truth in love more than Bonnie Dwyer. For 23 years as editor of Spectrum, and for some years before that reporting, she has always spoken the truth I have always felt that when I wanted to know what was really going on in the church, the first person I tried to read was Bonnie Dwyer. She is an exquisitely professional journalist, by the way, educated at La Sierra University, and knows how to get the facts right. She cares about the truth. You will get the who and what and where and when, but you will also find perceptive analysis that helps you understand the why. Now, in her work of telling the truth, Bonnie has covered so many conference sessions, councils, committees, task forces, and other meetings that one could be tempted to become cynical. In fact, there are some things that Bonnie has covered that I have seen along with her that would almost make anybody cynical. But Bonnie has always been able to avoid that temptation. She has not only spoken the truth, but she has spoken the truth in love. And that is because she loves the church and she cares deeply about community. And so what she says, even when critical, has always been constructive. In addition to her reporting, she has given us a magazine and a website that have stimulated us with the best of Adventist thought, ideas, art, and poetry. Now, the text doesn't end by saying we should speak the truth in love. It goes on to say that when we do speak the truth in love, we will grow into the mature body of our head, Jesus Christ. We have not yet done that. We all know that we have lots more growing to do. But I am absolutely convinced that we would be much less mature had it not been for the ministry of Bonnie Dwyer. Please join me in thanking her for building up the church by speaking the truth in love.
Pardon me if I do an imitation of Joe Biden right now. Let me take that off. This will be short because what needs to be said has been said. I'd like to pay lip service as I begin to the idea that all of us are fallen and finite. Now we're going to proceed to saying how much we admire Bonnie. If intellectual leadership entails concern for one's local congregation, I know enough about Bonnie to know that she's there at the potluck and the Sabbath school class. And intellectual leadership in a Christian community without entire commitment to the local congregation is so deeply flawed as to be empty. And as John said, if intellectual leadership involves a commitment to telling the truth, then Bonnie has been faithful in a way that can inspire all of us. She's been faithful to telling the truth. And if intellectual leadership entails a commitment to reconciliation, then the points that John has made need to be underscored. She has managed to be a truth teller no one hates, no one looks down on. They may disagree. They may even hate Spectrum, but nobody hates Bonnie because she is the embodiment of reconciliation. Bonnie, you have been faithful. And if intellectual leadership in a religious community entails stamina against the pull of indifference, against the difficulties of the long, hard slog toward the sanctification of a religious community, Bonnie, you have been faithful. And to the great degree Despite our mutual fallenness and finitude, you have been faithful. Bonnie, you have been a gift to us all. You have fought the good fight, and in our hearts, we have felt how much gratitude we owe to you. So thank you so much.
I feel like Mark Twain, and that I've been to my funeral, and I'm not dead yet, I hope to continue to be part of this community because it has been the real gift of my job. I got a job and I was given a community, and it's one that I do deeply love. And I thank you all for being part of it because you are a fabulous community. I look around at my friends, and none of them have the rich variety of just vibrant, fabulous minds in their lives the way that I do because of this community, ASRS, Adventist Forum, and my local church. All of them very dear and precious, and I thank you all for being part of it, and I thank you for kind words. This has been a real surprise, and I got through this without crying.